She only went to the wedding to watch another bride's luck, but when the vows stopped cold, Agatha found herself chasing a poisoner instead of confetti. This is Agatha Raisin and the wedding that stopped at the aisle. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your comments make this cozy corner feel even warmer, and if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe so you never miss the next mystery. It was one of those sharp Cotswold mornings that made the Honeystone cottages look smug. The drizzle had stopped, reluctantly, leaving the hedgerows glistening as if Carsely had been varnished overnight. Agatha Raisin, standing at her front gate with a cigarette in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other, was feeling cheated. Spring, she thought sourly, was for optimists and fools. She'd seen both varieties already that morning, Mrs. Mason parading her new sun hat at the post office, and a pair of newlyweds giggling by the bakery window. Hodge, curled up on the windowsill inside, opened one eye, judged her unworthy of attention, and resumed his nap. The post arrived with a thud, scattering onto the damp path. Agatha gathered the envelopes irritably. Electricity bill, gardening catalogue, and one thick cream-coloured invitation that reeked of self-importance. The gold lettering gleamed. The wedding of Melissa Partridge and Peter Cummings. Agatha blinked. Melissa Partridge, she muttered, as though tasting something sour. Melissa, Carsely's reigning queen of smugness, young, slim, always with a fresh blow-dry and the air of someone whose mirrors applauded her. Her fiancé, Peter, was the sort of man who looked permanently apologetic about being handsome. Agatha sniffed. The nerve of inviting me, after she called my hydrangeas vulgar. Still, she carried the invitation inside and laid it reverently on the kitchen table as if it were radioactive. The phone rang. Roy Silver's bright London voice burst down the line. "Darling Aggie, have you heard? The Partridge girl's wedding. I nearly choked on my latte when I saw the announcement." "I was just honoured with the invitation," said Agatha crisply, lighting another cigarette. "Oh, you must go. Cotswold couture meets social disaster. Irresistible combination. What will you wear?" "My dignity," said Agatha, though she was already picturing herself in that new sapphire blue hat she'd bought on sale in Mercester. "Try dignity with a touch of feathers," Roy trilled. "Send me photos. I'll fax you accessory suggestions." Agatha hung up before he could describe anything with sequins. Later at the Red Lion, Carsely's gossip network was in full performance. Doris Simpson leaned across her sherry like a conspirator. "They say the bride's spending a fortune. Imported lilies, a live quartet, and a cake taller than the vicar." "Poor vicar," murmured Agatha. "Peter looks none too happy about it," Doris added. "Heard him say in the butcher's it's all getting a bit much." Mrs. Bloxby, calm as always, sipped her tea. "Weddings can bring out the best or the worst in people." "Or both at once," said Agatha. She tried to sound detached, but her pulse quickened at the mention of live quartet. Nothing irked her like other people's grandeur. Bill Wong stopped by the pub briefly, in plain clothes and a patient expression. "If you're all starting a betting pool on disasters," he said, "please leave me out of it." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "Why, is there something to bet on?" He smiled. "Just a feeling the village might get more excitement than it bargained for." Outside, drizzle returned, turning the street lamps to halos. Agatha walked home briskly, heels clicking on wet pavement. Her mind buzzed, not with romance but with curiosity. There was something faintly theatrical about the whole affair. At the engagement party months ago, she'd overheard Melissa snapping at Peter near the vicarage garden. Something about doing as you're told for once. Agatha had pretended to admire the roses while storing the line carefully for later enjoyment. Now, with the wedding approaching, she wondered if that quarrel had ever really ended. Back at her cottage, Hodge greeted her with the bare minimum of interest. She poured herself a small gin, for reflection naturally, and set the invitation upright on the mantelpiece beside last year's Carsely Garden Society certificate. "Melissa Partridge and Peter Cummings request the honour." She read the line aloud, then smirked. "Honour's a strong word." Outside, the drizzle turned to steady rain, drumming gently on the roof. The cottage glowed with lamplight and faint self-satisfaction, or perhaps that was Agatha herself. She tapped ash into the tray, eyeing the curly-cued lettering again. "Still," she muttered, "at least someone's managing to get married." Hodge yawned extravagantly from the hearthrug, stretching one paw in the direction of her gin glass. "Don't start," Agatha warned him. "You're no romantic either." The cat blinked, unimpressed. Agatha smiled despite herself. The village might drown in tool and gossip before the month was over. But for tonight, Carsely was quiet, and she had front-row seats to the next grand scandal. She stubbed out her cigarette, switched off the light, and left the invitation propped upright, catching the glow of the lamp like a promise and a threat all at once. Saturday dawned with suspicious brightness, the kind that made even sensible villagers believe in omens. Carsely glittered under a pale sun, ribbons fluttering on hedgerows and church gates as though the entire Cotswolds had decided to compete for prettiest postcard. Agatha Raisin surveyed herself in the hall mirror and frowned. The sapphire hat from Mercester looked magnificent when she stood perfectly still. Unfortunately, the matching heels had been designed by a sadist. She winced, straightened her shoulders, and told Hodge, who lounged on the doormat, "Don't wait up, it's bound to be ghastly." The church was already filling when she arrived. Agatha slid into a pew beside Doris Simpson, nodding stiffly at the familiar rows of smug faces. The air smelled of lilies, floor polish, and ambition. At the front, Melissa Partridge glittered like a Christmas ornament about to declare war. Charles Frayth appeared moments later, immaculate but faintly wilted, like an expensive rose left too close to the gin. He leaned in and murmured, "Morning, Aggie. You look ravishingly respectable." "Don't start," she muttered. "You look hungover." "I am," said Charles cheerfully. "I find it adds pathos to weddings." The organ began its tremulous introduction, and conversation fluttered into silence. Bridesmaids glided down the aisle, followed by Melissa, radiant and smugly aware of it. Agatha folded her arms, trying not to envy the smoothness of that ivory dress. Peter Cummings, waiting at the altar, looked as if he were about to confess to something. Mrs. Bloxby beamed kindly from the second row. Even Bill Wong had appeared discreetly at the back, no doubt roped in to keep the peace should Carsely enthusiasm boil over. The ceremony began flawlessly. Vows were read, hymns mumbled, and Agatha's feet throbbed in rhythm with the organ. Then, just as Melissa reached the final step toward Peter, the bride froze. Her bouquet slipped from her hands. A glass near the front pew toppled, its contents spilling across the flagstones. Melissa swayed, blinked once, and crumpled. For a second there was silence so pure, even the birds held their breath. Then pandemonium. Bridesmaids shrieked. The vicar shouted for water. Doris gasped, "Oh heavens!" loud enough to echo. Agatha stood, clutching the pew in front of her. Charles muttered, "Well, that's dramatic timing." Agatha's sharp eyes caught a glint near the fallen bouquet, a small water glass from the lectern, a pale smear clinging to the rim with a faint metallic tang. She knelt, kept clear of the rim, discreetly sniffed and wrinkled her nose. Not wine, not water either. Something sharper. "Don't touch anything," said Bill, appearing beside her. His tone was calm, but his eyes sharp. "We'll handle this." Agatha bristled. "Handle it? She's fainted." "She's been poisoned," he said quietly. Agatha straightened. "Poisoned? You can't be serious." "Not fatally, thank heaven. She's being taken to hospital now." He nodded toward the doorway, where the bride was carried out pale as parchment. Peter followed, face grey and bewildered. The congregation dissolved into murmurs. Someone began sobbing in the back row, and Mrs. Bloxby quietly ushered people into prayer. Agatha felt a peculiar mixture of horror and excitement. Poison! In Carsely! And at a wedding, no less. The faintest thrill prickled her spine. Then indignation followed close behind. This was meant to be Melissa's day to show off, not upstage her. Charles touched her elbow. "You're grinning, Aggie. Bad form." She scowled. "I am not. I'm thinking." About murder? About how people ruin good shoes for attention. Outside, the crowd spilled into the churchyard like released pigeons. The perfect May air was now thick with speculation. Doris Simpson whispered to anyone listening that it must have been nerves. The butcher's wife countered that it was a modern diet thing. Someone else insisted it was flu, while a young man near the gate announced dramatically that it was arsenic, definitely arsenic. Agatha sidled up to Bill as he directed an ambulance through the narrow lane. "Do you really think it's poison?" "Toxicology will confirm," he said. "Off the record, yes. Digitalis, maybe. We'll know soon enough. Keep your nose out of it, Agatha." She gave him her most innocent smile. "I was only curious." "Exactly what I'm afraid of." He left her standing in the churned-up grass, hat slightly askew, curiosity blazing. The church bells remained silent, the wedding party gone, the gossip rising like smoke. Charles joined her, hands in pockets, surveying the chaos. "Well, my dear, that's what you call a cliffhanger." "Someone tried to murder her," Agatha said. "Or spare him," said Charles dryly, glancing toward the path where Peter had vanished. Agatha's mouth twitched. "Don't be ridiculous. No man escapes that easily." By afternoon, the Red Lion was packed again, the village retelling the same 5 minutes with endless variations. Agatha endured an hour of it before escaping home. She kicked off her tortuous heels and collapsed into an armchair. The invitation still sat on her mantelpiece, smug as ever. She lit a cigarette, exhaling toward it. "Well, Melissa," she murmured, "you always did know how to make an entrance. Pity about the exit." Hodge, asleep by the radiator, stretched a paw and opened one golden eye, unimpressed. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "You'd have gone too if there'd been smoked salmon at the reception." Outside, the village settled into evening quiet, but Carsely's collective imagination was wide awake. The bells never rang that day. Instead, they waited, like the rest of the Cotswolds, for the next whisper, the next theory, the next scandal. And Agatha, glass in hand, smiled to herself. The wedding might have stopped at the aisle, but her curiosity was already halfway down it. Sunday morning dawned pale and damp, the kind of weather that made gossip travel faster than light. By breakfast, half of Carsely knew the bride had collapsed. By lunch, they were discussing the poison, and by tea-time they had appointed their own suspects. Agatha Raisin sat at her kitchen table, radio murmuring in the background, and tried to smoke without blowing ash into her marmalade. Hodge sprawled nearby like a soft accusation, tail flicking. Every ring of the telephone brought another morsel of scandal. Doris Simpson had called twice already, breathless. Her cousin was shouting at the caterer the night before, she'd announced, and the caterer's wife swears he went home without his van keys. Agatha had murmured agreement, already imagining a crime of culinary vengeance. The third call was Mrs. Bloxby, ever the gentle contrast. "My dear Mrs. Raisin, perhaps we might pray for poor Melissa's recovery before condemning anyone." "Of course," said Agatha, "but prayer doesn't stop stupidity." Mrs. Bloxby sighed softly. "No, but it helps the rest of us bear it." Agatha promised to behave, hung up, and immediately began to plan her first line of inquiry. By late morning, Charles Frayth's vintage convertible pulled up outside, glinting through the drizzle. He emerged looking smug and overfed. "Morning, detective," he said. "I thought we might go snooping together. Terribly improper, which makes it irresistible." "Fine," said Agatha, locking her door. "We'll start at the hospital. If anyone asks, you're my chauffeur." "And what are you?" "A concerned acquaintance," she said briskly, brushing imaginary lint from her coat. At Mercester General, the corridors smelled of disinfectant and wilted carnations. Melissa Partridge lay in a private room, pale and furious. Her mother sat beside her with a handkerchief the size of a napkin, dabbing at tears that didn't exist. A nurse barred Agatha's entry. "Family only, I'm afraid." Agatha flashed her most professional smile. "Mrs. Raisin, Carsely Parish Council. We're just checking on the welfare of one of our leading lights." The nurse's hesitation was brief. Charles's aristocratic air sealed the deception. They slipped inside. Melissa's eyes fluttered open, recognition sharpening them to daggers. "What are you doing here?" "Just seeing how you're faring, dear," Agatha said smoothly. "You gave us all such a fright." "A fright," Melissa repeated bitterly. "Try humiliation. They'll dine out on it for years." Her mother interjected, voice like chilled water. "My daughter needs rest, Mrs. Raisin, was it? Not village gossip." "Of course," Agatha said, refusing to retreat. "We only wondered if the doctor had said what caused it." The doctor himself entered then, harried, bespectacled, and already weary of visitors. "We're running tests, but this was no simple faint. Some sort of ingestion, quite possibly deliberate." Melissa gasped faintly. Her mother stiffened. Agatha's instincts sharpened like claws. "Deliberate?" she said. "You mean—" "Let's not speculate," the doctor cut in, "but I've notified the police." Charles, ever the diplomat, guided Agatha gently toward the door before she could pounce. "Best leave them to it, old girl." Outside, Agatha lit a cigarette the moment they reached the car park. The first drag tasted like triumph. Deliberate, I knew it. You know nothing, Charles said, except how to break hospital policy. Oh, shut up. That woman's voice could freeze gin. I'd bet she knows more than she's saying. He smiled faintly. Envy looks terrible on you, Aggie. Almost as bad as those heels. They drove back to Carsely in companionable silence until they saw Roy Silver's red Mini parked outside Agatha's cottage. He burst out the moment they stepped in. Darlings, I came as soon as I heard. Poison at a village wedding. The tabloids will faint with joy. We must control the narrative before some yokel sells the story. Roy, Agatha groaned. This is a crime, not a campaign. Everything's a campaign if you've got the right headline, he said, already inspecting her cupboards for biscuits. Charles poured himself a gin. You do realize she's already on the case? Roy's eyes widened theatrically. Oh no, not again. The last time you helped, someone nearly sued. Agatha bristled. That was years ago. And besides, I'm not helping. I'm merely observing. With what, binoculars? With brains, she snapped. The phone rang again. Bill Wong's calm voice came through. Just letting you know, Agatha. Keep away from the hospital and the families. Official investigation now. Me? I'm washing my hair all week, she said sweetly. You never wash your hair all week, he said, then hung up before she could retort. Roy clapped his hands. So, what's the plan, Nancy Drew? Stakeout? Polygraph in the potting shed? The plan, Agatha said with dignity, is to review evidence, which means starting with the obvious. She opened her shopping bag and produced a bottle of unopened champagne. The label gleamed, La Belle Étoile. Charles raised an eyebrow. And that came from? The church, left behind under a pew. Must have been meant for the reception. Roy eyed it suspiciously. You didn't take evidence, did you? I retrieved it for safekeeping, she said firmly, and because no one else had the wit to notice it. Charles leaned closer, reading the foil neck. French, mid-range, but not the same brand they served at the engagement do. Curious. Exactly, said Agatha. The label swap could be misdirection. The real dose went on a specific glass. Roy recoiled. Darling, you're not going to taste it, are you? Don't be idiotic. I'm not suicidal. Yet. Charles chuckled. If you pour it out, at least do it over the sink. I'd hate to waste perfectly good carpet. Agatha hesitated, bottle poised. The faint thrill of danger hummed through her fingers. What if the culprit had made a mistake, or intended her to find it? She set it down carefully. I'll wait. Something about this doesn't add up. Roy perched on the arm of her chair, exuding London perfume and disbelief. You're actually enjoying this. Don't be absurd. I'm merely curious. You're glowing, said Charles, like a cat with cream. Agatha ignored them both, though her reflection in the dark window confirmed it. Beneath irritation and gossip, she felt alive again. The church bells that hadn't rung still echoed faintly in her thoughts. Somewhere, Melissa Partridge lay furious and ill, her perfect wedding poisoned. Somewhere else, someone was laughing quietly into their tea. Agatha turned to Hodge, who was watching from his chair with the detached superiority of all cats. Either someone meant to stop a wedding, she said softly, or a life. Hodge blinked slowly, unimpressed, and curled tighter against the cushion. Agatha sighed, poured herself a modest gin, and watched the village lights through the drizzle. Carsely would feast on the story for weeks, and she intended to make sure she was the one carving it. Monday morning brought drizzle fine enough to dampen the spirit without ever admitting it was rain. Carsely wore its usual expression of mild disapproval at the weather, and Agatha Raisin mirrored it perfectly at her kitchen window. The unopened bottle of champagne sat on her table, gleaming like evidence in a courtroom. Hodge sniffed at it once, found it dull, and resumed washing his paw. Agatha poured coffee, grimacing. She much preferred gin, but even she had standards before noon. A knock rattled the door. Charles Fraith stood outside, trench coat unbuttoned, holding two mismatched champagne flutes. For the experiment, he said cheerfully. You've got nerve, she said, ushering him in. It's barely breakfast time. Investigation never sleeps, he replied, already removing the foil. Agatha snatched the bottle back. We're testing, not tippling, and you're to look, not sip. Charles lifted the flute to the light instead of drinking. Looks ordinary, bubbles behaving, no haze. Agatha tilted the glass to check the rim. No sediment, no odd odour. Perhaps the poison's shy, said Charles, topping up his glass. Perhaps you're an idiot, Agatha retorted. He laughed, then stretched his legs toward the fire. So, who supplied it then? You've got that look, the one that says you've bullied information out of someone. Agatha lit a cigarette, exhaling with satisfaction. Mrs. Bloxby's brother-in-law does catering. He handled the wedding. Says some bottles came from a local vintner, chap in Mercester called Alan Derry. Name rings a bell. Should. He was romantically involved with Melissa last year. She dropped him when Peter Cummings came along with the bigger house and better pedigree. Ouch, said Charles. Nothing like heartbreak to flavour a bottle. You're telling me, Agatha muttered. Anyway, I'm going to ask him a few questions. You mean interrogate him until he cries? Don't be melodramatic. I'll just charm him. Charles raised his glass. Then heaven help him. The Mercester wine shop was the kind that pretended to be French. Dim lighting, wooden crates, faint smell of cork and pretension. Alan Derry emerged from the back room wiping his hands, handsome in a weary sort of way. Mrs. Raisin, isn't it? You live in Carsely. I heard about the wedding. Dreadful business. Indeed, said Agatha, summoning her most professional smile. You supplied some champagne, I believe. Just 6 bottles. Special request. Melissa wanted something romantic and exclusive. How touching. And how long had you known her? He hesitated. We dated, briefly. It was over long before her engagement. She was ambitious. I wasn't rich enough. Agatha's sympathy lasted about 5 seconds. Did you attend the wedding? No, she didn't invite me. So you didn't have access to the bottles afterward? Certainly not. My driver delivered them to the caterer 2 days prior. I've got invoices. He spoke smoothly, but there was something defensive beneath it. A guilty conscience or just pride bruised by gossip. Agatha couldn't tell. She thanked him with frosty civility and left, noting the foxgloves blooming along his front path. Back in Carsely, Charles had clearly decided to make himself at home. He was sprawled on her sofa, half dozing, with Hodge asleep on his lap. A betrayal Agatha took personally. Bill Wong dropped by, Charles murmured. He's in a mood. As if summoned, Bill appeared again moments later, holding his police notebook like a shield. Agatha, we've had the toxicology report, he said. It's digitalis, foxglove. Pretty but lethal if concentrated. Every garden in the county's got some. So, that's what it was, Agatha said. Melissa always did love flowers. Fitting, really. Don't start, Bill warned, and stop snooping. You're not on the case. Who said I was? You've already been seen questioning people in Mercester. Research, she said primly. Bill sighed. For once, let the police handle it. We'll trace the supply chain, check the champagne, and speak with the families. Charles stirred, stretching lazily. Sounds terribly dull, old man. Why not let Agatha have her fun? Because Agatha's fun usually ends with me filling out paperwork, said Bill, deadpan. Agatha bridled. I resent that. Good, he said, heading for the door. Then it's mutual. She followed him out onto the front step, voice softening. Bill, off the record, could the poison have been added later, during the ceremony? He hesitated. Possibly, but it would have taken precision and nerve. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. She watched him leave, rain misting his jacket, and felt the stir of excitement she tried to disguise as concern. By late afternoon, the drizzle thickened into proper rain. Agatha couldn't sit still. She left Charles snoring by the fire and took her umbrella, wandering through the village lanes toward the church. The place was deserted, the flowers from the wedding already drooping. The air smelled of damp petals and forgotten vows. Agatha's shoes squelched on the gravel path as she skirted the vestry. That was when she saw it, a patch of flattened foxglove near the wall, petals crushed, stems snapped. Someone had walked there recently, perhaps gathered some for a bouquet, or for something else. She crouched, tracing the marks with her gloved fingers. Coincidence? Maybe. But in Carsely, coincidence often travelled hand in hand with deceit. A sound rustled behind her, a faint shift of leaves. She straightened quickly, scanning the churchyard. Nothing but yews and mist, yet she felt watched. If that's you, Charles, she called, you'll regret it. Silence. Then the faintest scrape of a shoe. She walked briskly back to the path, pretending indifference while her pulse thudded like a drum. No footsteps followed. Still, She didn't relax until her own garden gate clicked behind her. Charles was gone, leaving a note in his lazy scrawl. Got bored, gone to pub, left the evidence untouched, mostly. Agatha poured herself a stiff gin. Hodge leapt onto the table, sniffing the damp edge of her coat as if to confirm her adventure. "Foxglove," she muttered, lighting a cigarette. "Beautiful and deadly, rather like half the women I know." She stared out at the rain, her reflection ghosted in the window, proud, foolish, alive. Someone in Carsely had poisoned a bride, and somewhere, perhaps behind a hedge or a pew, that someone had just watched her find a clue. The thought sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. She took another sip of gin and said softly, "Let's see who wilts first." Hodge yawned, unimpressed, and pawed at her sleeve until she set down the cigarette. Yes, she said. "Some detective I am, scolded by a cat." Outside, the rain thickened, washing the village clean of gossip for the night, though not, Agatha suspected, of guilt. The next morning dawned sulky and damp, the sort of half-hearted drizzle that Carsely specialised in. It was the kind of weather that made umbrellas pointless and gossip essential. Agatha Raisin, wrapped in a belted mac that had once been fashionable in London, watched raindrops crawl down her kitchen window and told herself she was merely having coffee, not waiting for scandal. Hodge sat on the counter, tail flicking disapprovingly at her cigarette smoke. He had all the moral restraint of Mrs. Bloxby, and none of her tact. The phone rang. Agatha snatched it up. "Mrs. Raisin, it's Fiona. Fiona Giles. I was one of Melissa's bridesmaids." Agatha blinked. Ah, yes, the one who looked as if she'd rather be in the dentist's chair. There was a small, nervous laugh. "I don't want to speak over the phone. Could I? Might I come by? It's about the wedding." That word, "about," was all Agatha needed. She stubbed out her cigarette and straightened. "Half an hour, and bring something juicy." Fiona arrived looking as if she feared divine retribution. Prim, pale, wrapped in beige. Even her umbrella was beige. Agatha ushered her in with forced patience and offered tea, which Fiona accepted without drinking. "It's dreadful of me to say anything," she began, twisting her gloves. "But I don't think Peter ever truly wanted to marry her." Agatha arched an eyebrow. "Nerves, perhaps?" "Not nerves. Pressure. His mother's, mostly. She wanted it arranged, like a business merger." Agatha perked up. "What kind of merger?" "Financial," Fiona said quickly, then looked horrified she'd spoken. Melissa's father's firm was struggling, and Peter's family had debts of their own. It was all convenient. "Ah," said Agatha, smiling like a cat shown the cream jug. "Convenient marriages have a nasty habit of turning inconvenient." "You mustn't quote me," Fiona whispered. "I shouldn't even be here. But I saw the way Peter looked at her that morning, like a man walking to the gallows." The line had a lovely drama to it. Agatha stored it away for future use. Later that afternoon, Roy Silver burst through her cottage door, rain-spattered and glowing with self-importance. "Darling, I've unearthed dynamite." "You've unearthed mud," Agatha said. "Wipe your shoes." "Melissa's father," Roy continued breathlessly, ignoring her, "is broke. Absolutely, unashamedly broke. His construction firm's being sued for unpaid contracts. He was banking on the Cummings money to patch things up." Agatha frowned. "So the wedding was a bailout in lace." "Exactly. And what's more, Peter's mother knew it. She's been spreading quiet little whispers about gold diggers in white satin. Vicious old cow by the sound of her." "Perfect," said Agatha, eyes gleaming. "We'll pay her a visit." "We?" said Roy, horrified. "You're coming for moral support." "My morals prefer London," he said faintly. The Cummings estate sat on the edge of Mercester, an overconfident house surrounded by damp lawns. Charles Fraith met them there, claiming he'd been invited for lunch. Agatha suspected he'd invited himself. Mrs. Cummings received them with all the warmth of a marble statue. Her drawing-room smelled faintly of lavender and disapproval. "Mrs. Raisin," she said coolly, "I understand you are something of a, how shall I put it, local enthusiast." "Curious neighbour," said Agatha, smiling sweetly, "and journalist, when required." "How charming." Charles, ever the diplomat, produced flattery like a magician's scarf. "You must be relieved your son's fiancée is recovering. So fortunate it wasn't worse." "Fortunate," Mrs. Cummings repeated, voice like a frost. although one wonders if it was misfortune at all. Peter was uneasy about the match. Agatha leaned forward. Because of Melissa? Because of her pretensions, said Mrs. Cummings crisply. She wished to climb socially and take us with her. We declined the lift. Roy choked on his tea. Agatha shot him a warning look. So you opposed the marriage? I disapproved of the haste, Mrs. Cummings said smoothly. A woman like that needs careful handling. My husband, bless him, believed it kinder to let matters run their course. Nature, however, intervened. The phrase lingered in the air like perfume or poison. Charles changed the subject with practiced ease, and Mrs. Cummings retreated into politeness. But as they left, Agatha noticed Peter's photo on the hall table, his smile stiff, his eyes tired. She's hiding something, Agatha said as soon as they reached the car. Of course she is, Charles said. It's the family tradition. Roy blew out a dramatic sigh. Honestly, Aggie, you've dragged me into a class war. The mother looks like she eats the poor for breakfast. Then I'm bringing the dessert course, said Agatha grimly. By evening, the Red Lion was heaving with speculation. The wedding scandal had overtaken even Doris Simpson's usual tales of parish intrigue. They say the florist packed up 2 days before, Doris announced proudly, as if she'd discovered the clue herself. Why? Asked Agatha, feigning innocence. Rode with the bride over the flower arrangements. Melissa wanted lilies. The florist said they'd overpower the scent. There was shouting, proper shouting. Then she stormed off and refused to finish the job. Who replaced her? Some new assistant, I think. Nervous thing. Came in last minute to help the caterer decorate the church. Doris leaned forward, eyes bright. Mark my words, someone knew what they were doing. Agatha smiled into her wine. Someone usually does. Charles arrived just in time to rescue her from Doris's forensic enthusiasm. Still stirring the pot, Aggie? Still drinking from it? She countered. He grinned. What's your theory now? Love and money, she said. They're always the motive, one or the other, usually both. And which do you prefer? Depends which pays better, she said, though her tone softened. The rain outside beat a gentle rhythm on the pub windows. Villagers murmured over their pints, shaping rumours like potters at their wheels. Bill Wong entered briefly to buy cigarettes and received an immediate chorus of questions. He ignored them all, caught Agatha's eye and gave her a tiny shake of the head. Don't interfere. Naturally, she took it as encouragement. By nightfall, Agatha was home again, coat damp, mind whirring. She poured herself a gin, lighting a cigarette to match. Hodge mewed for attention, unimpressed by human folly. You'd think people got married for love, she said, watching the smoke curl toward the ceiling. But no. Money, status, pride, a bouquet of thorns, every one. Hodge blinked and began washing his paw. She smiled wryly. Yes, I know. I'm no romantic either. She picked up her notepad, scribbling connections. Florist quits. New assistant, champagne supply, foxglove. The lines looked like a spider's web, and somewhere in it the killer waited, smug as ever. Agatha drained her glass and stared out into the Carsely night, where drizzle misted the street lamps to halos. Somewhere behind one of those tidy curtains, someone was hiding a terrible secret. Love and money, she murmured to Hodge. A lethal bouquet indeed. The cat yawned, turned his back, and curled into sleep, a perfect punctuation mark to her restless thoughts. Tuesday dawned deceptively cheerful, the kind of bright Cotswold morning that made even mud look picturesque. Agatha Raisin, however, regarded the sunlight with suspicion. Sunshine in Carsely, she believed, was nature's way of softening people up before scandal struck. She sat at her desk, chain-smoking over a notebook headed Motives and Monsters. Beneath it she had written 3 names and crossed out 2. The only one left was Fiona Giles, bridesmaid. Too composed, Agatha muttered. And those beige tights. No one that calm is innocent. Hodge, sprawled beside her, sneezed at the smoke and turned his back. Just then, Charles Fraith sauntered in, looking infuriatingly well-rested. Still hunting murderers before breakfast, Aggie? At least I'm doing something useful, she said, unlike you, who seems to believe charm is an occupation. It's a calling, he said solemnly, helping himself to toast. So who's your latest villain? Fiona Giles, Agatha replied. Bridesmaid. Buttoned up, evasive, and I've discovered she used to go out with Peter. Charles blinked. Good Lord, you're serious. So, what's the motive? Jilted love, unrequited passion, lace envy. Jealousy, she said firmly. She probably couldn't stand watching him marry Melissa. It happens. Aggie, you're mistaking Carsely for Coronation Street again. Agatha glared. Laugh if you like, but you didn't see her expression when I mentioned the wedding at the Red Lion. It wasn't sorrow, it was relief. Or indigestion, said Charles. She ignored him. I'm going to interview her. I'll pretend I'm writing an article for the parish newsletter. Something about modern village women. You, said Charles, you'd terrify the Women's Institute, let alone Fiona. Perfect, Agatha said, snapping her notebook shut. Fiona lived in a neat little semi outside Mercester, the kind of place where curtains match the kettle. She greeted Agatha with a cautious smile, smoothing her skirt like a schoolgirl summoned to the headmistress's office. Thank you for agreeing to see me, Agatha said in her most professional tone. I'm writing about women's experiences at local events. You were a bridesmaid, weren't you? Yes, said Fiona softly. It was dreadful, really. Because of what happened. Because of everything. She clasped her hands tightly. Melissa wasn't easy to please. She wanted everything perfect, even us. Us? The bridesmaids. We had to diet, practice walking, rehearse smiles. It was like being in a musical without the fun. Agatha's sympathy flickered, then hardened. You were close to Peter once, weren't you? Fiona flinched. Who told you that? No one, but you just did. The colour drained from Fiona's face. It was years ago, hardly a relationship, and Melissa never let me forget it. Did you ever wish you'd kept him? Good heavens, no, she whispered. I pitied him. Still do. He looked trapped. Agatha leaned forward. Were you near the champagne table that morning? Fiona's composure cracked. I wasn't even inside when it happened. I was in the churchyard fetching Melissa's bouquet from the car. Ask anyone. Agatha was taken aback by the vehemence. The girl's eyes were shining, not guilty but frightened. Why so nervous then? Because everyone's talking, Fiona said, voice trembling, and I know what they think. But I swear, Mrs. Raisin, I didn't touch anything. I just wanted to get through the day. Her sincerity was disarming, and Agatha left feeling oddly chastened. Charles was waiting in the car, humming tunelessly. Well? He asked. Nothing, she said, except that I may have frightened the only innocent person in the Cotswolds. Progress, then, he said brightly. That evening, Bill Wong arrived at her door, rain dripping from his jacket. He looked mildly exasperated, the expression he reserved exclusively for Agatha. Before you ask, he said, Fiona's alibi checks out. Several witnesses saw her outside with the bouquet when the poisoning occurred. She couldn't have done it. Agatha sighed. Blast, and I was so sure. I suppose you've come to gloat. Actually, I came to warn you. Again. About what? Roy Silver's been bragging to his contacts that you're on the case. One of them rang me, a so-called journalist from the Mercester Herald. Do try not to turn this into a circus. Roy exaggerates everything, said Agatha. True, but he's right about one thing. The champagne label was swapped. She looked up sharply. Swapped? Forensics found digitalis residue on the bride's stemware and on a swapped label from a La Belle Etoile crate. The catering invoice lists Champagne de Montclair, so someone switched labels to misdirect us. That's how they hid which bottle carried the poison. Meaning someone inside the catering team? Or someone with access to the church before the ceremony, Bill said. And before you ask, no, we don't have proof yet. Then I'll find some, Agatha declared. Bill groaned. You'll do nothing of the sort. Stay out of it. But Agatha was already planning her next move. By late afternoon, she found herself outside the village florist, blooming lovely, a cheerful front masking faint despair. The bell tinkled as she entered. Buckets of lilies and carnations lined the counter, their perfume sharp enough to sting. Mrs. Delia Harper, the owner, looked up from a bouquet with a tired smile. A soft-spoken widow, always in lavender cardigans and polite sorrow. Mrs. Raisin, she said, I wondered when you'd call. Everyone else has. Everyone else. Oh, you know. Did you notice anything unusual? Was Melissa difficult? The answer's yes, always. Agatha leaned on the counter. You were meant to do her wedding, weren't you? Until I wasn't, Mrs. Harper said quietly. She accused me of overcharging and refused to pay the deposit. Said she'd find someone with standards. She reduced my assistant to tears. You must have been furious. Hurt more than anything. Mrs. Harper's voice trembled. She came back 2 days before the ceremony, begging me to finish the arrangements. I refused. I couldn't face her again. Agatha studied the woman. The shop smelled of damp petals and regret. On the workbench lay a pair of pruning shears and a scattered handful of foxglove stems. Foxglove's lovely this time of year, Agatha said casually. Mrs. Harper's hands stilled. Pretty, but dangerous if mishandled. A bit like people, don't you think? Agatha gave a thin smile. Depends which people. Mrs. Harper looked down at the wilting stems. Sometimes, she murmured, you almost wish flowers could bite back. It wasn't said with malice or more a weary truth, but it chilled Agatha all the same. Outside, the sky had turned pewter. Agatha walked briskly through the drizzle, thoughts crowding. Fiona was innocent. The champagne label had been switched, and the florist, gentle as she seemed, carried enough resentment to fill a bouquet of motives. When she reached her cottage, Hodge was waiting by the door, tail flicking impatiently. She bent to stroke him. You'd have liked Melissa, you old rascal. She was exactly your type, sleek, spoiled, and convinced the world revolved around her. Hodge mewed in faint agreement, or hunger. It was hard to tell. Agatha poured herself a gin and sat by the window, the sound of rain pattering against the glass. Somewhere in the distance the church bell tolled 6 times, low, melancholy, as if marking more than just the hour. Sometimes hatred hides behind pretty manners, she murmured, and sometimes grace is just another disguise. Hodge jumped onto her lap, curling up with supreme indifference. Agatha smiled faintly, lighting a cigarette. You're right, of course. Flowers don't bite back. But people always do. Outside, the drizzle softened into mist, wrapping Carsely in deceptive calm. Inside, Agatha Raisin exhaled smoke and suspicion in equal measure, knowing tomorrow would bring another petal of truth and another thorn. Carsely greeted Thursday with deceptive innocence, a clean morning, blue sky, and the faint whir of lawnmowers trying to sound industrious. But beneath that pastoral calm, gossip hummed like bees in a bonnet. Word had spread that Melissa Partridge, recently poisoned and inconveniently not dead, was hosting a gratitude tea at her house that afternoon. Agatha Raisin heard it first from Doris Simpson, who stopped her outside the shop with all the solemnity of a BBC announcement. She's inviting everyone, Mrs. Raisin, the whole village, even me. Agatha squinted. She never invited you to anything before. Exactly, Doris said, eyes bright with relish. So I'm going. Might see someone faint again. Agatha continued home, muttering under her breath. Melissa's sudden benevolence reeked of calculation. Gratitude tea indeed, more like a publicity resurrection. By 3 o'clock, Agatha stood before her mirror, glaring at her reflection. She'd chosen a navy dress meant to look dignified but not desperate. Hodge, perched on the windowsill, flicked his tail in unimpressed judgment. Don't start, Agatha warned. If I don't go, the whole village will say I'm jealous. If I do go, they'll say I'm pretending not to be. Hodge yawned widely, proving neutrality in all village wars. At 3:30, Charles's vintage convertible rolled up the lane. Roy Silver was already in the passenger seat, wearing sunglasses that made him look like a camp spy. Darling, we're your moral support, Roy declared as Agatha climbed in. You're my camouflage, she retorted. If things go wrong, people will stare at you instead. Charles grinned. How comforting. Off to the lion's den. Melissa's house, a sleek affair of pale stone and polished windows, looked as though it had been freshly ironed. The front garden was lined with potted roses, too perfect to be natural. Cars were parked in a crooked line down the drive, their owners already spilling into the marquee on the lawn. Inside, the air smelled of cake, perfume, and tension. Melissa stood near a table laden with tea sandwiches, a picture of convalescent radiance in pastel silk. Her mother hovered nearby, smiling like a shark in pearls. Mrs. Raisin, Melissa trilled. How wonderful you could come. Agatha returned the smile with equal sweetness. Wouldn't have missed it. So brave of you to face everyone again. A faint twitch betrayed Melissa's composure. One mustn't hide, must one? People will talk either way. They will, Agatha agreed, especially when given tea and alcohol. Melissa's smile stiffened. She turned away to greet Mrs. Bloxby, who had arrived looking serene and unthreatened by human folly. She's back to form, murmured Charles. She's playing the martyr, Agatha said. I want to see who's still kneeling." Roy was already circulating, delighted to provide running commentary. "Oh, darling, the cattiness. Doris just told the vicar's wife that Melissa's colour's unnatural, and the vicar's wife said she'd pray for better foundation next time." Agatha snorted. "Leave it to Carsely to turn poison into entertainment." As the chatter swelled, trays of champagne appeared. The glasses glimmered in sunlight, identical to those from the ill-fated wedding. Agatha's eyes narrowed. "Same brand, La Belle Étoile. She's using the same batch." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Either she's brave or stupid." "Neither," said Agatha. "She's advertising her innocence." Moments later, Melissa tapped a spoon against her glass. "May I have your attention, please?" The crowd fell obediently silent. "I wanted to thank you all for your kindness," she said, voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. "And to assure you, the unpleasantness at the church was nothing but a tragic misunderstanding." Murmurs rippled through the guests. Agatha noticed Peter standing behind her, pale and motionless, eyes fixed on the lawn rather than his fiancée. Melissa lifted her glass. "To Carsely, for its loyalty and love." "And gossip," muttered Agatha. But as the guests raised their flutes, Melissa didn't. Instead, she reached for a tumbler of lemonade and smiled too sweetly. Agatha felt the prickle of suspicion. "Interesting," she said. "She won't touch her own champagne." Mrs. Bloxby, standing beside her, said gently, "Forgiveness doesn't always mean peace, Mrs. Raisin." Agatha frowned. "And that's meant to mean that some people forgive only to prove they're still superior," said Mrs. Bloxby with a serene smile. Agatha sighed. "You're wasted on the church. You should run MI5. After an hour of brittle conversation and over-buttered scones, the event began to dissolve. Peter slipped away toward the garden, looking hunted. Agatha followed discreetly, dragging Charles along. They found him near the rose trellis, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "Mr. Cummings," Agatha said, startling him. "Lovely party." He exhaled smoke. "It's not mine." "You don't seem terribly joyful for a man whose bride survived attempted murder." He gave a short laugh. "You think I had anything to celebrate? I didn't even want the wedding. My mother insisted. And Melissa, well, Melissa always got what she wanted." "Until now," Agatha said softly. He looked at her sharply. "You think I did it?" "Not yet, but your mother's fondness for control seems dangerous." "My mother's fondness for control keeps the roof over everyone's head," he said bitterly. "Melissa's money would have helped. Not that we'll see a penny now." "How convenient," murmured Charles. Peter crushed his cigarette and walked off. Agatha turned to Charles. "If his mother had anything to do with this, I'll find out." "Of course you will," he said. "You've frightened half the Cotswolds already." "And the other half deserve it," she said. By evening, Agatha was home again, notebook open, mind whirring. The drizzle had returned, pattering against the windows like someone trying to get her attention. She poured herself a gin and spread her notes across the table. Fiona, innocent. The florist, bitter. The champagne label switched. And now Mrs. Cummings, powerful, elegant, and conveniently connected to the supplier. Her gaze fell on a folded paper tucked beneath the stack. It was the delivery bill Roy had fetched from the Mercester vintner, a small detail she'd meant to revisit. She unfolded it now, squinting at the handwriting. Received by M. Cummings. Agatha sat back slowly. Cigarette paused mid-air. "McCummings," she murmured. "Melissa's initials, or Mrs. Cummings's first name, Margaret." She flipped through her notes. The vintner had said the order had been paid in cash. The receipt had no address, no signature from Peter. Only that elegant M. "Blast," Agatha muttered, stubbing out her cigarette. "I've been looking at the bride when the mother might have poured the drink." Hodge, asleep by the radiator, gave a disdainful flick of his tail. "Don't look so smug," she said. "You'd have missed it too." She poured another small gin, for focus, and read the bill again. The pieces were forming an uncomfortable picture: a controlling mother, a reluctant groom, a poisoned toast that stopped the wedding but didn't kill. "She didn't want to murder her," Agatha whispered, "just to stop the marriage." The idea chilled her even as it thrilled her. A crime of pride, not passion, precisely the kind that flourished in tidy drawing rooms. Outside, the rain deepened to a steady whisper. Agatha rose and closed the curtains, feeling the warmth of the fire against her back. "I suppose," she said aloud, "it's time I paid a call on Mrs. Cummings." Hodge stirred, stretching with imperial languor before curling back into a loaf. "Yes, I know," Agatha said. "I should leave it to Bill, but if I waited for the police, half of Carsely would die of boredom." She set down her glass, scribbled a line in her notebook, "Visit Mrs. Cummings, alone," and underlined it twice. Then, with a small wry smile, she added, "Wear pearls. Rich women talk more when they think you're one of them." She switched off the lamp, the cottage falling into its soft evening hush. Outside, the rain washed over the village roofs like a benediction or a warning. In the glow of the dying fire, Hodge yawned again, unimpressed by human intrigue. Agatha watched the ember light flicker across his fur and murmured, "A toast to trouble, my lad. Let's see who's really been drinking it." The next morning began with that peculiarly English kind of sunshine, bright but chilly, as if the weather were merely pretending to be pleasant. Agatha Raisin, dressed in her sharpest navy suit, regarded herself in the mirror and told Hodge, "If I'm going to confront a murderer, I may as well look prosperous." Hodge blinked lazily from the armchair, unimpressed by either her moral courage or her new lipstick. Agatha stubbed out her cigarette and grabbed her handbag. "Wish me luck," she said. The cat yawned, which seemed about right. Mrs. Cummings's house stood outside Mercester, a sprawling Georgian estate so neat it looked vacuumed. Agatha's small car wheezed up the gravel drive like a servant who'd taken the wrong entrance. Charles had offered to come along, but she'd refused. She preferred being underestimated. It gave her the advantage. The butler, all starch and suspicion, led her into a drawing room upholstered in cream and disapproval. Mrs. Cummings sat by the window, framed by orchids that seemed to wilt in her presence. "Mrs. Raisin," she said, her voice smooth as porcelain. "How unexpected." "Thank you for seeing me," Agatha replied, lowering herself onto the edge of a chair that looked too expensive to sit on. "I won't take much of your time." "I rather think you already have," said Mrs. Cummings, stirring her tea without looking up. "You've been asking rather intrusive questions about my family." "People talk in Carsely," Agatha said sweetly, "especially when poison's involved." "Ah, yes, the village sport." Mrs. Cummings took a delicate sip. "How thrilling for you all." "It's more than thrilling," said Agatha. "It's attempted murder." "A melodramatic phrase," Mrs. Cummings murmured. "Melissa was hardly dying. It was a shock, of course, but perhaps the girl thrives on attention." Agatha's temper twitched. "She nearly died on her wedding day. You don't call that attention-seeking?" Mrs. Cummings gave her a cool glance. "I call it appropriate timing." The remark hung in the air like a struck match. Agatha leaned forward. "You despised her, didn't you?" "Despised?" Mrs. Cummings smiled faintly. "No, I simply recognized her for what she was, a climber, and not even a subtle one. She wanted my son, my name, my house. It was all so dreadfully obvious." "And you were prepared to stop her, by any means?" Mrs. Cummings's spoon clinked gently against the china. Better a scandal than a disastrous marriage. Agatha's heart gave a small, triumphant thump. "That's quite an admission." "Of prudence, not guilt," said Mrs. Cummings crisply. "I warned Peter. I told him marrying that girl would poison his life." "You chose your words carefully," Agatha said. "Poison his life, indeed." Mrs. Cummings met her gaze. "Surely you don't think I'd stoop to something so vulgar? There are subtler ways to end an engagement." "Then perhaps you hired subtlety," Agatha suggested. The older woman's eyes flickered, just once. Before Agatha could press, footsteps sounded in the hall. The door swung open and Peter Cummings strode in, face stormy. "Mother, what's going on?" Mrs. Cummings rose, regal and unflappable. "Mrs. Raisin was just leaving." Agatha stood. "I was just asking a few questions about your fiancé's near-death experience." "You've no right to pry into our private affairs," Peter snapped. "When someone tries to murder a bride in public, it stops being private," Agatha retorted. "You think my mother—" He broke off, aghast. "That's absurd." Mrs. Cummings laid a soothing hand on his arm. "It's all right, darling. Mrs. Raisin enjoys her little theories. They make life interesting for her, I suppose." Agatha opened her mouth, then shut it. There was no point arguing with Marble. She gathered her bag and dignity. "I'm sure the police will find the truth eventually, even if it takes longer without my help." "That would be a mercy," Mrs. Cummings said. Agatha left, her heels clicking defiantly down the polished corridor. As she reached the door, she heard Peter hiss, "I told you to leave her out of it," followed by his mother's icy reply, "and I told you to choose better women." The slam of the door behind her was almost satisfying. Back in Carsely, the drizzle had returned, as though congratulating her on surviving the encounter. She went straight to the Red Lion, where the regulars looked up expectantly, the pub equivalent of a press conference. "Well?" Doris Simpson asked eagerly. "Did she do it?" "She's guilty of bad manners," Agatha said, sliding onto a stool. "But whether that's the same as murder, I'll let Bill decide." Bill Wong arrived not long after, shaking off his coat. "Perfect timing," Agatha said. "I need good news." "Then you'll be disappointed," he replied. "Toxicology's finished. The poison wasn't in the champagne after all." "What?" "They found traces of digitalis on the bride's glass, but not inside the bottle, which means the drink itself wasn't poisoned. The glass was." "You mean someone tampered with it directly?" "Exactly. A small amount of residue on the rim, likely transferred from lipstick." Agatha blinked. "Lipstick?" "Yes. The poisoner used a glass Melissa was meant to drink from, already dusted with the stuff. Swapped it at the last moment." "So whoever did it was near her during the ceremony," Agatha said slowly, "near enough to change her glass without notice." "That rules out the mother," Charles observed, strolling in with his usual timing. "She was sitting in the third pew, far too far back." Agatha frowned. "Then who was close enough?" Bill glanced at his notes. "One of the bridesmaids, the vicar's wife, a few guests in the front row. Oh, and the florist's assistant. She was arranging flowers near the altar that morning." "The florist's assistant," Agatha repeated. Nervous, wasn't she? Quiet girl, new to the job. "Yes," said Bill. "She slipped away before the commotion. We're trying to find her now." Agatha's mind began knitting the threads together. Foxglove in the churchyard, Mrs. Harper's bitterness, the assistant who'd been conveniently overlooked. "It wasn't Melissa they wanted to kill," she murmured. "It was her pride." "What do you mean?" Bill asked. "The poisoner wanted her humiliated, not dead. To stop the wedding publicly, to make her fall just like she made others fall." Charles gave her a look of reluctant admiration. "You're rather good at this when you're not terrifying people." "It's a talent," said Agatha. Bill sighed. "Leave this to me, Aggie. We'll find the girl and sort it properly." "Of course," she said sweetly, which fooled no one. That evening, Agatha sat by her fire, cigarette in hand, thoughts looping like smoke rings. The Cummings family's cold detachment still stung her pride, yet she couldn't quite hate Mrs. Cummings. The woman's cruelty had been pure self-preservation, uglier perhaps, but recognizable. She poured herself a small gin, the bottle clinking against the glass. Hodge leapt onto her lap, curling into a warm, judgmental loaf. "Well, my lad," she said, stroking his fur, "it turns out everyone's guilty of something. Vanity, resentment, snobbery, even me." Hodge blinked, unimpressed by her introspection. "Don't look so smug," she said. "You've got your sins too. Sloth, mostly." He purred, which she chose to interpret as agreement. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window. Agatha leaned back, half smiling, half weary. Somewhere out there was a frightened florist's assistant, the last missing piece in the bouquet of deceit. "Better a scandal than a marriage," she whispered, echoing Mrs. Cummings's line. "But some scandals bite back." She reached for another cigarette, the lighter's spark glinting briefly in the dim room. The scent of foxglove still lingered in her mind, poisonous, lovely, and entirely human. The Cotswold morning was sullen and grey, the kind that made even daffodils look indecisive. Carsely stirred reluctantly, milk floats rattling past, kettles boiling, gossip already steeping stronger than the tea. Agatha Raisin stood by her window, cigarette in hand, watching drizzle stripe the glass. Hodge sat nearby, tail flicking in mild irritation at the smell of smoke. "Don't look at me like that," Agatha told him. "If you'd seen what I've seen this week, you'd be smoking too." On the mantelpiece lay the fateful wedding invitation, creased, tea-stained, and far too smug for paper. Agatha had nearly thrown it away several times, but something about it kept her anchored to the case, as if it were judging her too. She stubbed out her cigarette and reached for her handbag. "Come on, Hodge, we're off to see a florist about a felony." The cat blinked, unimpressed, and returned to sleep. The florist's cottage stood at the edge of Mercester, small and lopsided under a thatched roof. Petunias drooped from the window boxes as if sharing a private sorrow. Agatha knocked firmly. The door opened a cautious inch. Ellie Harper, the florist's young assistant, peeked out. Her eyes were wide, her voice barely a whisper. "Mrs. Raisin, I'm not taking orders today." "Good thing I'm not here for a bouquet," said Agatha briskly. "May I come in?" I'm busy." "Nonsense, you're alone and shaking, hardly busy." Ellie hesitated, then stepped back. "My mum's Delia. She owns Blooming Lovely," Ellie said, twisting her apron. I helped." The cottage smelled faintly of lavender and stale tears. Agatha noticed a half-finished arrangement of daisies on the table, their stems trembling in a glass jar. "Lovely flowers," she said, sitting without invitation. "Much less poisonous than foxglove, don't you think?" The girl flinched. Agatha leaned forward. "You were seen near the front pew that morning, Ellie. No one's accusing you of murder. Yet. But you need to tell me what happened before the police come asking less politely." Ellie's lips parted, but no sound came. Her hands twisted the edge of her apron. I didn't mean for her to..." She broke off, eyes flooding. Agatha's tone softened. "Take your time, dear. You've already said more than most murderers manage." Ellie shook her head vehemently. "I'm not a murderer. I swear it. I only wanted her to feel what she did to us." "Us?" "My mum and me. She ruined us." The words tumbled out now, jagged and desperate. "Melissa ordered the wedding flowers from Mum's shop. Then, a week before the wedding, she accused us of overcharging. Said the lilies were common. She told everyone we'd tried to cheat her. We lost half our customers in a day." "And your mother?" "She cried for weeks. We nearly lost the house. I begged Melissa to apologize, but she laughed. Said it would teach us to run a proper business." Agatha's stomach turned. She'd known Melissa's vanity, but this was cruelty refined to an art. "So, you decided to repay the favor," Agatha said quietly. Ellie nodded, trembling. "I only wanted to make her ill enough to cancel the wedding. I thought if she got sick, really sick, she'd have to stop. I didn't think..." Her voice broke. "You used foxglove from the churchyard," Agatha said gently. "Mixed with lipstick, wasn't it? On her glass." The girl's eyes widened. "How did you..." said Agatha. "And a bit of experience with bad decisions." Ellie buried her face in her hands. "I wiped the glass, swapped it with hers when she wasn't looking. I thought it'd just make her faint. I swear I didn't want her dead." Agatha sat back, exhaling slowly. The rain beat softly against the windows, the sound of judgment from above. "Why didn't you run?" she asked. "I couldn't leave Mum alone. She doesn't know. Please don't tell her." For a long moment, Agatha said nothing. She'd faced liars, killers, and frauds before, but this was different. Not wickedness, just desperation. Finally, she reached for the phone on the table. "You understand I have to call Bill Wong." Ellie nodded through tears. "I know." Agatha hesitated a fraction before dialing. "He'll treat you fairly," she said. "He's not one for theatrics. Leave those to me." The arrest was quiet. Bill arrived within the hour, calm and professional, his sympathy hidden behind procedure. Ellie surrendered without resistance. As the car pulled away, her mother appeared at the gate, bewildered, clutching a trowel. "What's going on?" she called. Bill promised explanations at the station. Agatha turned away, her throat tight. Charles found her later that evening in the Red Lion, nursing a gin and a mood. "You've done it again," he said cheerfully, sliding into the booth. "Solved another village scandal. Mrs. Bloxby says you'll be on postage stamps soon." "Spare me," said Agatha. "There's no glory in wrecking a girl's life. She poisoned someone, Aggie. She was half a child, driven mad by humiliation. Hardly Macbeth." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Since when did you go soft?" "Since I realized everyone's capable of one terrible thing if pushed far enough," she said. He studied her. "Including you?" "Oh, I prefer something more stylish than foxglove," she said dryly. "But yes, probably." Roy Silver appeared in a burst of perfume and excitement. "Darlings, you will not believe it. The Mercester Gazette wants my exclusive on The Florist's Revenge. I've already given them your best angle, Aggie. Stoic, tragic, morally conflicted. You'll love it." "I don't," she said. "Oh, but think of the exposure. You're practically Carsely's answer to Miss Marple." "Miss Marple never had to deal with you," she muttered. Roy ignored her. "They want a photo too. I said your house is terribly Cotswold chic. I'll send a photographer tomorrow." "If he steps 1 foot near my garden, I'll throw a trowel at him," said Agatha. Charles chuckled. "You'll have to buy Doris's paper now. She's probably collecting clippings for your scrapbook." Agatha groaned. Wonderful. Fame without fortune, my least favourite combination. Later that night, Charles insisted on dinner in celebration. He chose the most self-satisfied restaurant in Mercester, complete with a pianist who looked as if he charged by the sigh. "To justice," Charles said, raising his glass of champagne. Agatha stared at the bubbles. "No," she said flatly. "No more champagne, thank you." "Still sensitive?" he teased. "Still thinking," she said. He shrugged. "Suit yourself, more for me." She watched him drink, the faint clink of crystal echoing uncomfortably. The word justice felt hollow. Ellie would face trial, Melissa would recover, smug as ever, and Carsely would gossip until the next scandal replaced it. Life, Agatha thought grimly, always rewarded the wrong sort. When she returned home, Hodge was waiting by the door, tail flicking in silent accusation for her lateness. Yes, she said, scooping him up. "I've been consorting with idiots again. Don't rub it in." He meowed indignantly until she filled his bowl, then sauntered off in dignified silence. Agatha poured herself a small gin, just enough for reflection, and stood before the mantelpiece. The wedding invitation still lay there, gold script catching the lamplight. "Love and revenge," she murmured, "a fine pairing, until someone adds poison." She took a slow sip, eyes fixed on the elegant lettering. Melissa Partridge and Peter Cummings, names that had once promised a fairy tale, now synonymous with shame. Carsely would dine on it for months. Agatha's lips curved wryly. At least it wasn't one of mine this time. Outside, the rain had eased into a soft mist, wrapping the village in quiet repentance. Somewhere in the distance a church bell tolled, low, forgiving. She carried her glass to the window and looked out at the glistening hedgerows. For once the Cotswolds seemed at peace, though she doubted it would last. In Carsely, tranquillity was only ever the pause between rumours. "You'd think people would learn," she said aloud. Hodge appeared beside her, leaping onto the sill with feline grace. He gave her a slow, deliberate blink, as if to say, "People never do." Agatha smiled faintly. "You're right, of course. That's why we'll never be bored." She reached for her cigarette case, then hesitated. The thought of champagne glasses, lipstick and mistakes lingered too vividly. Instead, she set the case down and said quietly, "No more champagne, no more poison, and no more pretending any of it makes sense." Hodge yawned, unconvinced by her moral stance, and curled into sleep. Agatha turned off the lamp. The cottage sank into comfortable darkness. One woman, one cat, and the endless human comedy waiting just beyond the drizzle. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd visit Mrs. Bloxby for tea. She needed kindness more than answers. But tonight, she simply stood in the hush of her small, safe world and whispered, "Good riddance to weddings." The rain began again, gentle as a sigh, while Hodge's purr filled the quiet like the village's truest lullaby. The first blush of summer crept into Carsely, softening hedgerows and coaxing roses into bloom. The scandal that had gripped the village for weeks, the poisoned wedding, the arrest, the gossip, had at last begun to fade. Or rather, it had been replaced by newer, smaller dramas. At the post office they now discussed Doris Simpson's disastrous perm. At the Red Lion, the debate had turned to whether the vicar's new sermon series was too cheerful for Lent. Melissa Partridge's downfall had become yesterday's excitement, though no one could quite resist a wistful, well, she always thought too much of herself. Agatha Raisin, for her part, was relieved not to hear the words champagne or bride for a while. Yet she couldn't quite shake the case from her thoughts. That afternoon she found herself walking to the vicarage, craving tea and moral perspective. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and distant rain. Mrs. Bloxby welcomed her in with her usual calm smile, the kettle already humming as if it had expected Agatha too. "You've been quiet lately," Mrs. Bloxby said, pouring the tea. "For self-preservation," said Agatha. "Every time I open my mouth something dreadful happens. Either someone gets arrested, or Roy sells the story to a tabloid." Mrs. Bloxby laughed softly. "You did what you thought was right, and you uncovered the truth." "Yes, but it wasn't very satisfying truth, was it?" Agatha stirred her tea absently. Just another small person trampled by a bigger one. No villains, only petty nastiness. "That's rather the point," said Mrs. Blocksby gently. "Life is mostly small things done out of pride or fear. The large crimes are only the exaggerated versions." Agatha frowned. "You always make wickedness sound so reasonable." "I make people sound human," said Mrs. Blocksby, her eyes kind, "even the unpleasant ones." Agatha sighed. "Melissa's moved to London, I hear, back to the same crowd that encouraged her to lord it over the rest of us. And Peter, poor fool, walks around like someone's let the air out of him." "Time will mend it," said Mrs. Blocksby. "It never does," Agatha said, then quickly added, "Not properly. People forget the scandal, not the sting." They drank in companionable silence for a moment, the ticking of the clock filling the pause. "Do you ever think," Agatha said slowly, "that vanity's worse than greed? Greed only takes. Vanity makes you destroy yourself, just to be admired." Mrs. Blocksby looked thoughtful. "We all want to be loved, Mrs. Raisin," she said softly, "but not everyone survives the performance." Agatha gave a wry smile. "You should put that on the parish notice board. It might stop people getting married. Or it might fill the church," Mrs. Blocksby said, smiling. They both laughed quietly, two women who'd seen too much of human folly to pretend it was rare. By evening, drizzle had returned, polite but persistent. Agatha walked home through the damp lanes, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. The village lights glowed faintly behind lace curtains, and the air smelled of wood smoke and earth. Her cottage was warm and familiar, the lamps soft against the gloom. Hodge was curled by the window, his tail wrapped like punctuation around his paws. "You're the only creature I know who never judges," she told him, hanging up her coat. Hodge yawned and blinked, which she took for agreement. Agatha lit a cigarette and wandered to the mantelpiece. The old invitation still lay there, curling slightly at the edges, a relic of someone else's ambition. For a moment she considered throwing it away, but sentiment, or perhaps vanity, stopped her hand. The telephone rang. She picked it up, bracing herself. "Aggie, you'll never guess what," Roy Silver's voice sparkled down the line. "You're invited. Well, I'm invited, but I'm bringing you as my +1 to a very glamorous wedding in London. The groom's a producer, the bride's a model, and someone said there'll be society press coverage. Think of it as your redemption arc." "Roy," said Agatha, exhaling smoke, "if I attend another wedding, the bride will die of fright before she reaches the altar." "Oh, don't be dramatic. I promise it'll be perfectly safe. Probably." Agatha smiled despite herself. "You're incorrigible. And you love me for it. I'll fax the details tomorrow. Mwah." The line clicked dead. Agatha set the receiver down, half amused, half resigned. "Another glamorous wedding," she murmured, "purely in the interest of crime prevention, of course." Hodge flicked his tail in silent disbelief. "Oh, hush. You like London. All those pigeons and no morals." She poured herself a small gin, watching the lamplight dance in the glass. Outside, Carsely settled into its evening hush. The faint chime of the church clock, the rumble of a car fading into distance, the comforting domestic hum of lives moving on. Agatha looked around her cottage, tidy, familiar, peaceful, and felt that odd mixture of contentment and restlessness that seemed to define her life. She wanted calm, but she thrived on chaos. She raised her glass in a solitary toast. "To the wedding that wasn't," she said softly. Hodge twitched one ear, unimpressed by the sentiment. Agatha smiled. "And to the next one. Heaven help them." Outside, the drizzle softened into mist, wrapping Carsely in a tender grey shawl. Inside, the smoke from Agatha's cigarette curled upward in lazy spirals, mingling with the faint scent of gin and the comfort of mischief postponed. The village slept, but Agatha Raisin, vain, lonely, brilliant, ridiculous Agatha, did not. Somewhere between the end of one scandal and the start of another, she sat contentedly awake, waiting for life to misbehave again.